Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. This is now not a full week hiatus. I believe it's been 6 days since the last time I streamed, so I'm not entirely gone. Please don't worry. Plus, I'm actually more. Let me just swallow my gum because I'm too stupid to remember to do that before I start the stream. I see also now my stream is working on my iPad, so that's nice. The delay doesn't seem too big. The quality seems to be all right. So I still have my capabilities of streaming, still haven't unlearned everything during my time off. We actually have a bunch of Apple related news to talk about today and a lot in the world of semiconductors, so to speak. In fact, if I were to also react to every rumor that currently exists about Intel Nova Lake and AMD Zen 6 and how they're supposedly built on some variation of 2 nanometer, honestly, we would be here all evening. And yeah, I'm still on my prolonged vacation, by the way. So I will inform you guys about my streaming schedule for a while because next week I'm going back home, but then after that I'm actually kind of back here. So yeah, but I'll let you know on Discord. I'll let you know, obviously as always on YouTube, a few hours before I stream, when I stream. So if you're enjoying this channel, if you're enjoying my content, do the YouTube jazz as we call it around here. Subscribe, like, comment. I love seeing your comments. I already see some people coming in. Riley, our master yapper, saying he's hoping I'll be yapping for hours. We have Jonathan James, one of our Mark Check Pro Max members, actually leaving a 1 month membership milestone. Thank you for that. Saying good to see you back. Semi back to a regular schedule. I'm hoping that I'll be streaming on Thursday. So up until Wednesday, I'm definitely still here with my family, and then on Thursday, I'm hoping that once I get back to my own apartment, I'll also be able to stream games like Cyberpunk. I just have more internet there, faster stuff, more reliable stuff. Better just cooling in the apartment so nothing runs too hot. Today we still have a lot to react to and a lot to analyze, even outside of Cyberpunk. There's also some work being done currently by Digital Foundry. They've already put out a video on the general port of Cyberpunk to the Mac platform, but they are still working on a comparison between most current Macs, M4, M4 Max, stuff like that, and actual Windows hardware. So NVIDIA GPUs, AMD GPUs, hopefully some CPU benchmarking as well. So once that is complete, I would like to not just play Cyberpunk with you guys, but actually analyze it alongside you. We have also Rosa joining the chat saying hello. Hello to everyone. When I'm looking that way, that's where my iPad is, but I should still probably be looking into the camera. Mark, don't forget all your streaming skills in 2 weeks. So thank you guys. Also, thank you to everyone in the Discord community. It's been so lively. You guys help me stay up to date even when I'm gone, so to speak, when I'm meeting with friends and with family and everything like that. So thank you for that. Also, thank you to all your kind words recently, like just supporting me in this endeavor. It means a lot to me. Anybody who's watching, you can join our Discord. It's in the link to this. In the links of this channel, but also beyond that, of course, you can also support this channel more directly via super chats or super stickers. You can also become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Steve, Max, and Jonathan. And you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. Shout out to Ben Veni. Yep. Oh, that was so good. Such a good intro. I should have probably put it at the actual beginning of the video, though. But without further ado, let's get started. And I do have to get started with something that I actually did know, which is Mark Gurman is also on a little bit of a hiatus. That is going to be funny because he is probably our most major source for Apple news and rumors. Um, we still got a decent amount this week, but just warning you, if the coming days and weeks sound a little might be a little bit drier than you're used to. I mean, especially since we're at the end of July. I mean, next month is the month before the iPhone 17 event. That's why. But I think that he's coming back in the beginning of August, probably also with some scoops about the iPhone 17. So I don't expect the drought to be really prolonged. Plus, the drought hasn't been bad at all, I would argue, because we did get plenty of news and rumors. And one of those is actually coming in hot from today. So that came out right while I was taking a really, really long nap. Thank you to you guys on Discord for letting me know about it. And that is about the iPhone 17 Pro camera. And this is actually a leak that I have no recollection of seeing in this kind of form previously. It does sound really good to me because it's the kind of spec for Apple zoom camera that I have always wanted. If you have been following this channel, you know that I always bring up the flagship Xperia Sony smartphones. And they are variable zoom cameras. However, Sony's variable zoom cameras have many issues. They are paired with a terribly, terribly small sensor. And a terribly small sensor can sometimes work for a company like Apple and Google, who have mastered computational photography on smartphones. Sony, not so much. Plus, the actual switching between the zoom states, it doesn't have set zoom states, which is great. So it's literally like like a regular optical zoom on a camera, where you just change the lens right a little bit, and then it zooms in. But supposedly that's pretty slow, pretty cumbersome even sometimes. It takes a while for it to refocus after the zoom level has been set to a different focal length. So it's not the greatest experience. I assume, similar to how Apple introduced a really, really good image stabilizer with the 5x camera, that Apple would find a way to make such a solution much more intuitive and fun to use before they actually put into an iPhone. So let's actually talk about what that feature is supposedly looking like. This is coming from Mac Rumors, so this is a case where they have been actually contacted directly. It's not just a rumor that they are regurgitating from somebody else, usually somebody like Mark Gurman or Min-Chi Kuo or Ross Young, right? And there are several new camera-related features being brought up here. It's an anonymous tipster, so again, take all of this with a grain of salt, but I usually might not cover something like this, but I don't know why. Maybe I just want to really analyze it and show to you even my thought process on how I would like even divide this rumor into several sub-rumors and how I treat all of them individually. The tipster claimed to be familiar with an iPhone 17 Pro commercial that is allegedly being produced by Slovenian company Division Film. Apple is listed as one of Division Film's clients on its website, but Mac Rumors has not independently confirmed any of the information. So again, big grain of salt, like mountains of salt here, shared by the tipster, so skepticism is obviously warranted for now. The tipster revealed 3 alleged iPhone 17 Pro features that have not previously been rumored. An upgraded telephoto lens with up to 8x optical zoom. Now, this is important because that is not entirely unrumored. Now, the specific 8x zoom is new. We have had rumors that the iPhone 17 Pro or 18 Pro, it's kind of been a fluid rumor, might get a higher zoom range than 5x. Now, there have been some ways in which that would be achieved previously, and still probably most likely outcome of that is that it's a 5x that zooms into 10x because it's because it's a 48 megapixel camera rather than a 12 megapixel camera. And once you zoom into 12 megapixels onto that sensor, it basically becomes 10x. There's also been rumors about something like a super zoom range for the iPhone. And that said that instead of 120 millimeter focal length, it would change to something like 200 or even 240, so literally double. Well, 8x could also be achieved partially with a downgrade, actually, if you think about it, right? That 5x optical zoom could actually become a 4x optical zoom, but then it now becomes a much larger sensor. Or at least a higher resolution sensor, though most rumors point to the sensor being both larger and higher resolution than the current 12 megapixel. And then it goes from 4x to 12x, because Apple calls the zoom between like a 48 megapixel to a 12 megapixel part of the sensor still optical. Now that is, in my opinion, misleading, because it's not the definition of optical zoom. But Apple calls it kind of lossless, because you still get like actual pixels, like you don't zoom into a sub-pixel level of detail. It's kind of questionable, but it would be somewhat in line with what Apple does. And that would also line up with another rumor, though not exactly, and that is kind of interesting, because all of this doesn't line up exactly with any rumor we've had before. And we have had a rumor that Apple would switch to like a 3.5x like actual zoom, right? Which would have some benefits. For example, the more you zoom in on a small system like a phone, right, like a thin system, your aperture really suffers, right? So if Apple goes back to like a 3x zoom, which they actually had in the past, or something around it like a 3.5x, it could actually come with a much wider aperture that lets in more light onto that sensor. This would mean it's more of a 4x rather than the rumored 3.5x, which also is not actually a very current rumor. It's been rumored a while ago. But yeah, this is an interesting mix. It could be achieved in different ways. I mean, it could literally be an 8x optical zoom entirely based on optics. It could be some kind of digital zoom that Apple still calls optical. But then actually comes in a much more interesting part, which is that the lens can apparently move, allowing for continuous optical zoom at various focal lengths. And this would be matching pretty much the capabilities of the Sony Xperia flagships, which do have real optical variable zoom. However, it does not give us, for example, an exact range. Like, is it between 5x and 8x? Is it really wide? Like, is it between 3x and 8x, right? It tells it's up to 8x. Is it something more obscure? Like, is it between 2x and 4x, but then from 4x you go to 8x by going from 48 megapixel on the sensor to 12 megapixel on the sensor? So the details here are definitely lacking. I wouldn't be surprised if by Mark Gurman's return, or I don't know, at some point Jeff Poo or Min-Chi Kuo come out and actually either corroborate that or say, yeah, you know what, this sounds kind of fake, right? We have no things about it. Apple might go with like a 10x zoom, as I explained before, but still base it on a 5x system, just with higher resolution. But this is definitely fascinating. And if Apple pairs this with like a larger sensor and still a decently wide aperture, and actually still continues with their best in line like optical image stabilization, which, if you ever wonder why Apple performs so well in low light scenarios on their telephoto in comparison to even sometimes cameras that literally have like 2 or 3x larger sensors, that's because Apple has that great image stabilizer that they also use for the main sensor. Yeah, this is definitely a fascinating part. This is a very exciting part for nerds, as is the next rumor, which is that there is supposedly an all-new Pro camera app coming from Apple. Now, this is saying it's both for photos and videos, so this actually sounds like a pretty big undertaking. I mean, it wouldn't be entirely surprising given some stuff that Apple has done recently, like, for example, launching the Final Cut Pro like companion app for iPhone that directly pairs with Final Cut on your Mac. So Apple could kind of do that from this angle. This also doesn't unfortunately corroborate just how pro these apps are, but yeah, of course they would be competing with stuff like Halide, Kino, and Filmic Pro, which probably again would really hurt some of those devs. I know they have a dedicated customer base, a dedicated fan base, but it would really be hard to argue with Apple coming in and providing their own kind of like first party like solution to pro photo taking, pro video taking. I mean, especially with something like an optical zoom system, they could even provide some of the tricks that Sony offers you, like dynamic tracking of objects by saying, oh, I want to keep focusing on this, and instead of it being just a simple focus, it's actually like zoom and like tracking features, all that stuff that you would associate with a very advanced pro app. Not sure if Apple would consider charging for it. Apple has historically not really been known in recent years and kind of decades even to charge for stuff like that. This definitely sounds very exciting for like real photo and video nerds. Hope maybe Apple would even give you more control over the algorithm inside it, right? But yeah, then there's actually a third rumor here, which does lead me to believe that this might all be entirely fake, because this is actually a hardware rumor, and I don't mean hardwares in the sense it's part of the hardware of the camera. It's actually like literally like a button on the device, because supposedly, according to this rumor, there is a cat coming with every iPhone 17 Pro. Say hi, Bella. I will put her down because otherwise I will be like just entirely covered in hairs. You can see from this. Literally just touched her. It's in the middle of summer, so she's losing a lot of hair. She needs a lot of love. That's why she just joined me during the stream. But let's actually get back to the main rumor here, which is there is an additional camera control button. Again, this is a button that Apple famously has not called a button. They just call it camera control on the top edge of the devices for quickly accessing the camera and related settings. This would, and this is where it gets entirely insane in my opinion, this would complement the camera control button on the bottom right edge of all iPhone 16 models. So the fact that they're talking about a complementary button that does exactly the same thing. Now, this is a weird way they're wording it, which is it's complementary to the camera control of iPhone 16 models. Maybe there's, I don't know, some translation a problem that like the original leaker had, or something like that, or maybe they mistook something. Now, would I believe that there is a second camera control button on the iPhone 17 Pro, especially after all the leaks suggested that something like this isn't happening? No, I'm absolutely not believing this. Now, could it be that Apple put some camera control functionality into the power button as like an option? Now, that could be happening. Now, I don't foresee that being the same camera control functionality where you can literally like swipe up and down to access different settings and stuff like that. I mean, Apple could do that, but I mean, at that point, please also put in a fingerprint sensor into the power button, because that's something the community has been asking for a long time. Not me, I'm very happy with Face ID, but if you're gonna put in Pro functionality into the power button, please don't stick with camera control. A lot of people would be very happy to have Touch ID back, at least on the Pro models. Now, could I see Apple moving camera control? Down the line, sure, but it should be noted that also doesn't line up with any of the dummies that we have of the iPhone 17 Pro models, any of the leaks about the body itself, right? Even in descriptions from prior sources. And this is actually the thing that outside of the camera functionality, which who knows, maybe this person kind of has this exclusive leak based on the ad. Honestly, if this part of the rumor turns out to be untrue, then it means either something got really lost in translation, got really misunderstood, or all our previous leaks and rumors have been false, and Apple just has gone insane in adding extra buttons, which I would argue this is the least likely outcome here. But even more importantly, I would argue if this gets disproven by somebody like Mark Gurman, who could come along and say, look, I've seen actual like pre-production models of the 17 Pro. They don't have an extra camera control button. I don't have any source saying about camera control functionality inside the power button, for example. I honestly think this would put this entire rumor into question. And honestly, this is why I'm actually reacting to this rumor, because it's so fascinating, because it has like a crazy hardware spec that we didn't expect, but it isn't an outrageous hardware spec. It is something that could, like, it's conceivably possible, and I've even outlined several hardware solutions to achieve 8x optical zoom, and I've outlined competition that already does variable zoom. But then we do get like a pro camera app, which really hasn't been rumored before. And I mean, if it's ready enough to be put into ads, right? Which right now would be about the time where Apple starts making ads for the iPhone 17. That makes sense at least. But yeah, like we have not heard it from anybody else. So I don't know. And they just redesigned the main camera app with iOS 26. Now, it could be that in the process of designing the camera app for iOS 26, the camera developers came together and said, you know what, Tim, we really have a good solution for pro camera app. It could be really distinct. It could from these solutions like Halide, Kino, Filmic Pro, and it could be something that is from the ground up built around like liquid glass and shit like that. So it would really be very, very Apple. And then it got greenlit, and maybe it's relatively recent. But again, I'm not trying to justify what we are seeing here. I'm just trying to give you some potential context in how this could be true. It doesn't mean it actually would be. But then the additional camera control button, now that one really clashes with all prior leaks and rumors. So again, take all of this here with a mountain of salt. For the Pro Camera app, the tipster warned there's a chance Apple is planning a major update to its existing Final Cut camera app instead of an all-new app. This is why I'm surprised that this is saying for both photos and videos, because the Final Cut camera app, as you might imagine, is very much a video-focused application. But hey, I mean, Apple doesn't really have like an Aperture companion app because they don't make Aperture as an app anymore. So maybe they just decide to put it into one app. The tipster also said the rumors about the iPhone 17 Pro having a new copper-like color options and a centered Apple logo are apparently true. Now, it should be noted, it's not actually a centered Apple logo. It's centered inside the glass cutout of the aluminum chassis. So it's actually a lowered Apple logo, but I guess I know what he means. iPhone 17 Pro models are widely expected to feature a redesigned rear camera system. Now, we of course know from all the leaks and rumors, right, that Apple has this like super large camera island. Now, this is not entirely unique to the 17 Pros. Obviously, even the 17 Air with its single camera system has a tall, very elongated camera island. But maybe that extra space that Apple wins from making the camera island so much larger, at least like the tall section of it, maybe that goes directly into powering a much more advanced telephoto system. But again, who knows? I'm just trying to provide as much nuance as possible. This could be entirely fake. We've also heard about rumors that all three cameras this year would be 48 megapixels. And in February, Bloomberg's Mark Gurman said Apple was planning to emphasize the iPhone 17 Pro's improved video recording capabilities. He put it following: in past years, Apple has focused more heavily on the camera's photo taking abilities. This year, it will stress improvements to video recording. Supposedly, actually during iPhone 16 testing, Apple experimented with 8K video recording, which right now would become a lot more viable given that every camera on the back actually would be capable of it. Right now that every camera is 48 megapixels, all of them could record 8K. So maybe Apple was waiting for that. Maybe Apple was waiting just for better image signal processing capabilities before they introduce features like 8K, even better Dolby HDR capabilities, even higher frame rates, like who knows. One of the goals for 2025's iPhone line is to get the vlogging community and other video creators to move away from standalone cameras and use the iPhone for even more of their work, which I assume that would also be a big argument next year when Apple introduces the iPhone Fold, which of course would make it much more usable, especially for vlogging. So this could be like a multi-year focus from Apple to capture that specific market as well. Look for Apple to more heavily than ever tout those video recording capabilities. Again, he does unfortunately not elaborate on what are those improvements, but yeah, it makes sense. With the new iPhone's debut in September, and John Prosser, who of course is currently getting sued by Apple, has leaked in the past that the camera app on specifically the iPhone 17 Pro models would allow users to record video with front and rear cameras simultaneously. Now, this is not a new capability, but it should be noted that we don't know how Apple is trying to achieve this. Apple could literally be putting two image signal processors, for all we know, onto the A19 Pro die to further differentiate it from the regular A19 chip, plus of course the higher amount of memory. So Apple could allow you to record simultaneously from front and rear, but think about what those hardware capabilities, again, those hardware capabilities, I just made them up. It's just speculation on what could be the foundation for such a feature. But if Apple had two image signal processors, they could almost simultaneously feed from two cameras. I know, Taylor Bell, that Samsung already does this. I'm talking about specific ways to achieve this without any kind of quality loss. Now, with the front camera, that shouldn't be too difficult because the front camera obviously records in way lower quality than the back cameras. However, if Apple really wants to be super ambitious and does stuff like a dual ISP on the die of the A19 Pro, not only is it now peanuts for them to simultaneously record from the selfie and the back cameras, but it would also greatly improve the capabilities of even just recording with one camera, because simultaneously you could be feeding data from another camera, which could provide potentially some detail, some other color information, right? Even more light, depending on which cameras you're combining for that capability. All of this is entirely speculative, and even like there are, I believe, other pro apps on iPhone that allow you to do this. I'm not saying this is going to be the most innovative feature. I'm trying to discuss what specific implementation could be behind this to actually make this interesting and very Apple-y. Because believe me, if Apple deemed that feature important enough prior to this, they would have just allowed it. Like, they have more than enough oomph on the iPhone's cameras. Maybe not simultaneously for 4K 120 plus selfie recording, but definitely like 4K 30 on both front and back. But the fact that they're only doing this now, I mean, it could be a gimmick. I'm not arguing that. It could definitely be a gimmick that Apple just randomly says, okay, now it's good enough. Or, oh, now we have 12 gigs of memory. We need a 12 gigs of memory. Or we are using slightly faster storage, right? Which again, this is also like a hardware feature that Apple definitely could stand to improve a little, like the speed of the SSD inside. So that's what I'm speculating about, right? It could come from several different perspectives. Could be purely a gimmick, could be based on big hardware changes that go far beyond just this single capability. So that's what this channel is about. It's not saying, oh, this feature is worthless or this feature has been done by this company before that. I mean, we would be literally just here all day discussing, oh, technically this feature was done by like the Nokia Windows Phone and stuff like that. And yeah, I know Apple does not use UFS storage. Apple uses actually like pretty much a PCIe level implementation. Apple could give us faster storage than they currently do without switching to UFS. Apple is very particular about how they treat storage because they also want it to be, of course, controlled by the storage controllers on their Apple Silicon. So, and Apple definitely has shown that they are very capable of leveraging fast storage, as we see from the PCI 4x4 levels speeds on, for example, the MacBook Pros. Which usually has like much faster random access speeds than similarly fast storage on Windows. But again, now we would again be here all day discussing the different implementations of storage between smartphones and tablets and laptops and desktops and how it's leveraged differently from having storage controllers right on like an NVMe drive versus having only storage controllers right on the die and having dedicated storage controllers and decompression engines like the consoles do, or relying more on CPU cores like PCs do. So that would take us, unfortunately, too far away from Apple here. Yeah, but we've spent like almost half an hour on this one big juicy rumor, but I thought it was very important because, hey, we don't get something big like this. Again, this is an anonymous rumor by somebody without a clear track record, with one very weird portion in it. And one very ambitious part about it that currently exclusively leaked to Mac rumors. So take it with a mountain of salt. But I still wanted to cover this, give you my really detailed impression on each part of the rumor. And I think that it will take us at most 2 weeks before we hear from one of the major leakers and rumor guys whether or not this actually has any foot to stand on. So yeah, this is also like the latest story currently on Mac rumors. So let's see if they keep standing behind this once we get more. Now, speaking of Apple's big competition, Samsung, obviously. I'm not talking about the render for the photo. The photo is just old, yeah. We have gotten like new colors in the meantime. I've covered things like Apple using like a supposedly like liquid glass like color. With most rumors have kind of coalesced about an aluminum body, but a lot of renders still kind of make it look more titanium-y with that kind of different color hue. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Again, I have said that it's very likely that the final outcome will look noticeably different. We still have not yet heard anybody really talk about how Apple is going to make the glass portion here either very distinct from the aluminum body, or if they will try to visually merge them, right, by basically using the same kind of coating. It's going to be interesting, right? Maybe part of Apple's design language will be about making it very contrasty between the aluminum and the glass. Maybe it will be part about like making it all flow together, almost like in a liquid glass kind of way. So I'm really looking forward to just just getting the actual device in my hands, because as anybody who watches me for a while knows, I am gonna be buying the iPhone 17 Pro Max as a replacement for my 15 Pro Max that's currently also recording me during this stream. But let's actually get back to the competition. We did get the Exynos 2500 last month with the release of the Galaxy Z Flip 7. That didn't have the greatest results. We briefly looked into it. I'm still waiting for like a really comprehensive breakdown of the Exynos 2500. I mean, I could literally like show you numbers for the Z Flip 7. Z Flip 7. What? Z Flip 7. Yeah, supposedly, according to the latest rumors, yes, the Air is the only titanium model this year around, because it's just going to be like at 5.5, 5.6 millimeter thickness. I mean, we have already seen that exact same approach by Samsung, right, with the Galaxy S25 Edge, which is basically an S25 Plus with some compromises and some different solution, right? It has like a better main camera, but it only has 2 cameras rather than 3. Has a smaller battery, has a smaller cooling system, right? But it does have titanium rather than an aluminum body because it's so thin. It needs that for just improved rigidness. So you're saying you already have the Z Flip 7. That's interesting. I think you were the first person to ever grace my channel talking about owning a flip. Now, I have talked a lot about flips on this channel and how I'm much less a fan of that form factor versus the folds. But hey, it's good to have somebody who has actual impressions. So, but the reason why I'm presenting this here is just so we can talk a little bit about its actual objective performance. It should be noted that some of the numbers here are, I've seen them up and down. Like I've seen multi-core scores as low as 7,000 and as high as 8,000. Single core scores here is very low. I've seen them a tiny bit higher, like 5 to 10% higher. This is extremely low given the CPU architecture this is based on. So this is seemingly a compromise that comes primarily from using Samsung own Note, their own first well, it's kind of their second version of 3 nanometer, but it's also their first version of 3 nanometer that actually works. So it's their first GAFET node, so maybe it has some clock speed problems. So definitely for the kind of CPU cores that it's using, this is a pretty underwhelming result. We even see how it's barely faster than the Exynos 2400, though again, I have seen it perform better than the Exynos 2400. I'm all showing you this because we are now starting to get results for the Exynos 2600. Now, unlike the Exynos 2500, which was delayed, it was initially planned to come to some Galaxy S25 devices, but then it only came to the Flip 7. So it took Samsung a while to get yields under control, to get enough supply, and even then, they still only made it work for one kind of niche model. So, I'm really worried about the yields on their nodes. But supposedly, the Exynos 2600 is a direct continuation of it, so it's an improved version of either 3 nanometer or 2 nanometer, which is kind of a rebranded version of 3 nanometer anyway from Samsung. They basically rebranded it because they knew at that point Intel would be at Intel 18A and TSMC would be close to launching their first 2 nanometer node. So they really wanted to just be competitive, at least in terms of branding. It's a 10-core chip with 1 prime core and then plus 3 plus 6. The main core runs at 3.55 gigahertz. It should be noted, this is actually pretty low for the kind of core that they're using. So again, we're looking probably at complications coming from building it on Samsung Notes. Or maybe it's once again coming to a device that's extremely thin and light, who knows. This could be like a precursor result for the Galaxy S26 Edge. who knows? Taylor saying, so Samsung took the Google Tensor route. Raw performance is not going to wow you. However, it's geared to UI and overall usability, similar to the Google Pixel. Yeah, I would argue the Google Pixel performance is just too low, though, to argue about that, right? I do get your point, especially in multi-core. You really cannot complain too much about the Exynos 2500 right now, and obviously the 2600 will be a further improvement, right? I mean, in multi-core, it's literally all faster than the A17 Pro and my 15 Pro Max. It has a lot of cores, so it can potentially spread itself quite well over having like many background tasks. Now, using your own chip that's also on your node and everything, it could result in some compatibility issues, like, for example, using your own Eclipse GPU, which currently are developed in partnership with AMD. There's a rumor that the Eclipse 960 would actually be kind of almost completely Samsung in-house, but I will wait here for Samsung's official confirmation. I mean, we are not that far off from hearing from Samsung about any of this. This device was also tested with 12 gigs of RAM. You can see it's on Android 16, which of course makes sense. That's what One UI 8 is built on. Now, interestingly, here we have pretty low results. However, I actually didn't want to cover this rumor prior to something else, because this to me looks very much pre-production-y, right? I don't think that Samsung nodes are actually that bad that it would be barely better than the Z Flip 7 results that we just have seen, right? I mean, this is literally like almost margin of error. However, we did actually, just a few hours after this initial rumor came out, we kept getting more results. And these to me make far more sense, especially for a 10-core CPU. So we do have a single-core score that's kind of competitive with like the A17 Pro for the most part, which sits somewhere between 2,900 and 3,000. It's a little bit higher than something like the Dimensity 9400, lower than the Snapdragon 8 Elite. And then in the multi-core score, it is about the level of the 8 Elite or the Dimensity 9400. These chips can have varied level of multi-core results, like the 8 Elite for Galaxy, for example, does reach around 10,000 points. So, but it does so with very high power consumption, and it's very unpredictable how often it can even leverage that kind of performance, especially inside Samsung phones that aren't known to have the best cooling solutions. So this, to me, if this continues to be a very efficient chip built on the latest nodes that at least Samsung has to offer, right, that actually to me looks pretty good. It also, I believe, uses scalable matrix execution, so it does benefit from some of the newer Geekbench 6.3 and 6.4 testing that, for example, the A18 and A18 Pro chips benefit from, right? So those are SME are built specifically to accelerate tasks like that are AI related, for example. I know that there has been some controversy about like, oh, but should it be here? Of course it should. You see, there is a ton of instruction set stuff that's being leveraged here. Before we talk about something like SME2, doesn't really make sense to not include it in a benchmark. On Android, there is a counter argument to be made that Samsung does not control Android, right? So, for example, Taylor, you talked about Pixel being optimized for something new, right? Or like something Google specific for usability, for camera, for AI, right? Here, it's not like Samsung can come in and rewrite the entire Android pipeline to be SME2 based in a way that Apple could do it. Not that you would rewrite every task towards SME2, but I hope you guys know what I'm getting at, right? So could it be more gimmicky and less useful than Apple doing something like that? Sure, but I'm still glad to see it, right? You will never hear me shit about having more features inside a processor unless those more features are coming to the detriment of other stuff. Like, for example, with a lot of AI engines inside processors currently, I'm kind of getting pissed off how large those AI engines, those neural engines are becoming, and they're literally eating up space case that could be leveraged by the GPU, by the CPU, could be used for like a combined level 3 cache, right? Like system level cache that's accessible to the CPU and the GPU. That's kind of been my disappointment in even something like the Dimensity 9400, which could easily have a little bit more CPU performance. Like they could have given more cache, especially to the Prime cores, like right to the X925 cores, but they rather chose to go with like a really large AI engine. This is even worse on like the Xpeng 1 or whatever it was called, like that Xiaomi processor, where it really felt like almost 1/3 of the die was dedicated to an AI engine. And we have heard that Samsung would be prioritizing AI here with the Exynos 2600. So again, it's up to you to decide how much you want this. Again, I am a little bit more forgiving for Apple doing this, but not because, oh, Apple can do no wrong to me. No, it's because Apple does actually control the software stack, so they can actually optimize iOS to be much more AI driven, and not just for like a single chatbot, but they can build the AI functionality across the entire OS. And Apple is actually focusing on offline AI, right? For as good as Galaxy AI and Gemini in general, which Galaxy AI is built on, I always want to remind people, a lot of its best features, especially in their best version, are based on cloud compute, right? And I mean, Apple also has private cloud compute as a fallback for AI features that are a little bit too taxing for on-device processing, but Apple does a lot on-device. Plus, they are constantly expanding that list. Yeah, it's interesting to see how exactly this is going to be leveraged. There's one thing here, though, that's extremely interesting and hopefully exciting to me, especially if it also comes with a level of efficiency that makes this actually really usable, and that is we have a Steel Nomad result for the Exynos 2600 showing over 3100 points, which I actually open up a reference for Steel Nomad, and I'm always a little bit careful in comparing Apple to Android devices with those artificial benchmarks, everything from Wildlife Extreme to nowadays Steel Nomad Lite, right? But at least when you look at the Snapdragon 8 Elite, you will find that it's at the highest around 2600. So that would be a notable like 20% plus improvement over the flagship Qualcomm chip. And the 8 Elite 2 is rumored to be getting a pretty noticeable GPU increase. So that would put it probably in line with the 8 Elite 2. And who knows? We don't yet fully know how the Dimensity 9500 performs, but you see the Dimensity 9400 is already really close to the 8 Elite results. So it could actually be a pretty close three-way race for at least Android chips, right, with these kinds of benchmarks. Now, how exactly that plays out in the real world remains to be seen. Of course, we know that a lot of apps specifically optimized for the Snapdragon chips because they're such a big part of the market, especially the high-end market. Samsung coming out with an AMD-based GPU could benefit them too because developers are familiar with AMD hardware from the PC space and the console space. And then you have like MediaTek, you have now Xiaomi entering the ring. So it will be interesting to see not just what the raw performance in ideal cases is, but also what's the cooling like, what's the efficiency like, and of course, what's the compatibility and the optimization level that is being given to it by third-party developers, right? Big games like Genshin Impact, and even these days we have like PC emulators on Android, so you could potentially play even some at least DX11-ish AAA games on your phone, or something older like the old code for GTA 5, stuff like that. So yeah, pretty exciting, definitely, especially if it comes with the efficiency to actually sustain that kind of performance over 3000. I would be really excited, and in fact, that could be good enough for Samsung to in the not too distant future, consider putting Exynos on more and more of their own devices. And who knows, if like they really want to run their factories at maximum capacity all the time, they might find themselves even some customers from other Android manufacturers using that chip on smartphones, tablets, right? So yeah, I'm really excited. Contrary to what some people think, I'm not rooting for Apple to just randomly come in and every time destroy every competitor in CPU and GPU performance and whatever. I do expect a certain level of supremacy from Apple, especially in things like efficiency and single core performance, because those are very crucial things for how Apple builds their devices, right? They're very snappy, they're very fluid, they don't have the largest battery capacity, so they definitely need that. They also don't have the biggest cooling system, so they definitely need the efficiency. But yeah, I'm really rooting for Samsung to get back, not just to get back to previous Exynos levels, but surpass that and start making actually, like, make Exynos great, not again, but make Exynos great, period, exclamation point. We do have even more potential competition for Apple, and this time not in the smartphone space, but now in the laptop or Mac mini-like mini PC space, and that is NVIDIA is working on its own SoC. So this is not a GPU, not a small GPU for desktops or laptops. This is actually an SoC, and even more interestingly, it is an ARM-based SoC. It supposedly has 20 CPU cores. It's supposedly built, of course, on stuff like LPDDR memory, which of course would allow it to have a lot of memory, similar to how Apple offers 128 gigabytes of memory on the M4 Max, and then 512 gigabytes on the M3 Ultra, right? So this is necessary for NVIDIA in the AI race, right? They don't want to lose the laptop market to Apple just because the best in terms of GPU memory that you can have from NVIDIA currently on a laptop is 24 gigabytes, which definitely isn't great. And even if they use like dual stack GDDR7 in its 3 gigabyte module capacity, the best would be 48 gigabytes, which for Apple is really like 1/3 of their max on laptops. And that's not even considering that Apple could further boost the amount of memory that you might have on an M5 Max, maybe 192 gigabytes, maybe something as crazy as 256. So NVIDIA definitely needed more here. And we now do have GPU specs. Now, it should be important that the actual OpenCL result, this is Geekbench GPU compute, that was leaked, is not important, and I've discussed that on my Discord already. This is a preliminary result, similar to how that original 2100 Geekbench score for the Exynos 2600 turned into like 2800 on the better result, right? For the NVIDIA thing here, this is a preliminary testing. It could literally be clocked like 25% of its maximum clock speed. It's just currently being tested for stability. There has been a rumor that it's being delayed into sometime early to mid 2026. Originally, this was supposed to come out in sometime later this year. That's supposedly not happening, unfortunately. It's built on 20 CPU cores, built on ARM, so that's a big difference, of course, to all the x86 CPUs and even SoCs that we are seeing from companies like Intel and AMD. Base frequencies 4 gigahertz. I assume this is for the P cores, but I'm not sure. So this could be a misreading. Or the E cores are clocked at 4 gigahertz, but that would be kind of silly. So it has 10 P cores, 10 E cores roughly. And this specific solution was tested with 128 gigabytes of memory. Riley saying, I'm back, gonna have Mark rap and some skipping to catch up. Well, have fun with that. But the most important thing that you see here is that the compute units are of 48, right? So what is 48 compute units? Well, it is did they say it? Here, yeah, it's 6,144 cores total. And if you know anything about current generation RTX 5000 hardware, this is the exact level of cores that the desktop 5070 uses. I was actually like, I haven't read up on the actual core count of RTX 50 series in a while. I was actually confused because this sounded like a little bit too little for a desktop 5070 class card. But then I remember that NVIDIA has kind of been price gouging their consumers, and the 5070 Ti is more the card that we would kind of traditionally associated with the 70 series, but because of all the price increases that have come from the stupidly high AI demand, before that the crypto demand, and just in general the high GPU demand even from PC gamers, NVIDIA is kind of able to get away with not giving you too much for your money, unfortunately. But hey, I mean, it's not like Apple is a generous company, so to speak, either. Yeah, so this is supposedly on the level of a GPU 5070. Now, they do bring up a clock speed here, which is, of course, like 3 times lower than what you would associate with like GPU clock speeds. This is a production test. Even if it is actually lower clock than the desktop part, it still would be way faster than this. And in fact, this, let's even round up and say it's a 50,000 points OpenCL result, right? 50,000 points in OpenCL gives you roughly M2 Pro performance, and this is a 16 GPU core model. It should be noted that while GPU cores are not really directly comparable between one GPU core of Intel GPUs and one GPU core of AMD or NVIDIA, they are close enough to somewhat do that, right? So in fact, 48 compute units as the highest end ceiling, for example, here would actually be quite a nice competition to Apple's current maximum of 40. And don't forget, that's the almost 1 year old, well, at least by the time it comes out, the M4 Max will be well over a year old, right? But we don't know. Maybe the M5 Max also upgrades us to 48 GPU cores, right? So that actually makes sense from a competitive perspective. It should be noted, I don't see a bandwidth rumor about this. It is most likely 256-bit because that's just the solution that most even large PC SoCs go. Apple, of course, is using a massive 512-bit bus. It's LPDDR5X, so LPDDR6 is kind of around the corner, but it's hard to say. And this is using 10 CPU cores of X925. This is the same CPU core that you find in something, for example, like the Exynos 2500 and the Dimensity 9400, and it has 10 Cortex A725 efficiency cores, which makes sense. Like Apple has, for example, their 16-core layout on the M4 Max that consists of 12 much faster P cores than not just 12 versus 10 is much faster, but Apple's like CPU result, for example, for Geekbench is 4,000, right? Well, this one roughly gives you like 2,700. So even if you exclude the benefits of having scalable matrix executions as an instruction set, that still is a massive leap. So they need this. And unfortunately, launching this chip in 2026 will make it really unfavorably compare, especially at least in CPU performance, to the M5. But hey, they could definitely make this a lot cheaper than a comparably spec'd MacBook Pro, right? Like, I mean, plus for a lot of PC users, unfortunately, it's relying on ARM, while for Apple, it's a huge upside because they have all of those years of developing ARM software and pushing their developers towards ARM, because ARM is the underlying architecture of iPhones and iPads and Apple Watches and Apple TVs and Apple Vision Pro and everything, right? On PC, x86 still reigns supreme. So, and Windows on ARM is still very messy. Now, if one company could really push the PC space more towards adopting ARM as an architecture, it would be NVIDIA. I mean, NVIDIA believed enough in that vision that back in the day, they actually wanted to buy ARM and own the company. That wasn't allowed by regulatory agencies. They said that NVIDIA would basically have too much control over relevant like semiconductor stuff, right? Not only with their huge GPU stuff, especially these days with all the AI stuff, all the gaming stuff, all the server compute stuff. Yeah, but obviously the most interesting here is in the leak is the fact that it has 48 compute units or 6,144 CUDA cores that are based on Blackwell. Blackwell is not the best architecture, but it still has some advantages over even Apple's own implementations. Like, for example, it seems like their ratio of ray tracing versus raster performance is higher than Apple's. The efficiency of Blackwell has been a disappointment to me. It is pretty much just a continuation of Ampere. Now, that makes sense because both Blackwell and Ampere are actually based on the same 4-nanometer node. But it should be noted that if this launches early 2026, Apple will be on the third generation of 3-nanometer, right, which would be N3P. If this is still 4-nanometer, which I really hope it's not, I really hope it's some version of 3-nanometer, then I definitely don't see too much happening here, unfortunately. If this is 3-nanometer, N3E or N3P doesn't really matter there, too small of a difference, 5% here and there, then I actually could see this being not just a solution that's great because, oh, look, you can have so much memory, or look, these CPU cores, while not the greatest anymore, they're way more efficient than what Intel and AMD are doing, and maybe you don't get the best compatibility, but hey, you get 20 cores. And hey, you get like this would be what? This is like a 5080 laptop GPU, right? Like if it's a 5070 desktop, it's like a 5070. Is there a 5070 Ti laptop card, right? And yeah, it does say here this is what they've built for the GB10 super chip, and they're suspiciously close in specs, if you see that. So it's kind of like a development platform for this. And yeah, it's 256-bit, which does unfortunately, at least in bandwidth, puts it more as a competition for Apple's M Pro chips rather than M Max chips. But then again, they could make up for some of that by just making it cheaper. Where's the poor boys variant? I assume that there would be like bint versions of this. And definitely versions with like maybe 64 gigabytes of memory. Hey, maybe even like a 32 gigabytes. Like maybe there would be like a version with 32 gigs of memory, half the amount of CUDA cores, 25 to 33% less CPU cores, or even more. And then it could be put into something like a Windows handheld, like not necessarily the next Steam Deck. From everything we know, Steam Deck 2 is still going to be based on AMD, on x86, but it could be like an NVIDIA made, or at least an NVIDIA branded like Steam Deck competitor. We could see them partner up with like your usual, like your Asuses, your MSIs, your Gigabytes, right? And give us something that is something that I have wanted from Apple for a while. I want like an iPad mini that's actively cooled with an M series chip, like 7 to 8,000 milliampere hours, that lets you connect like Switch-like controllers to it. And I know the games are not there yet, but if they allow it to run at least Mac stuff, right? That's a lot of great stuff. I would pay top dollar for it, especially consider the efficiency, right? It's Apple Silicon. it's potentially something super efficient, like a tandem OLED screen. But unfortunately, Apple still looks at tablets as those thin and light, very almost ethereal products, right? Very elegant, but yeah, this is something that like a poor boy's variant of this chip could enable on Windows. That's that competition. There's actually a story here that's about an Apple competitor that might stop being one again. Intel is has a new CEO, right? So they ousted out Pat Gelsinger, and now they have Lip Pu Tan. I apologize if I butchered his name. They just now had a very weak quarter two financial earnings report. Their stock tumbled by like 8%. It's really not great. Right now, their biggest focus is Intel 18A. And unfortunately, what we have learned about 18A in the last few months and year at least is that 18A is not going to have any relevant support from third-party customers, right? So 18A is basically an Intel internal node. It's going to be used for their CPUs, which is kind of weird because we actually heard that Nova Lake might be built on TSMC 2 nanometer, which would be absolutely baffling. But even though like Intel has been saying that 18A will be better, at least than N3P even, and be a very relevant competitor to TSMC 2 nanometer. But now supposedly, I don't know what their supply is. I don't know what their yields are. So 18A seemingly is niche, seemingly pretty much only Intel. And that leads us to Intel 14A, which is after like a P variant or a plus variant, however you want to call it, of Intel 18A. Supposedly Intel 18A is actually a really long node. Now that does not mean that it's not going to be replaced by something else, but you remember when Intel was stuck with 14 nanometer, right? Not 14 angstrom, but 14 nanometer. They had like 14 nanometer plus and plus plus and plus 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 plus. That's a few too many pluses, but you get what I mean, right? Seemingly 18A could be stuck like that, but for very different reasons. So 14A will continue the ribbon fed, which is basically Intel's own version of GAAFET. I talked with you in the past about how GAAFET, unlike FinFET, is very fragmented. If you know, for example, about the basis of these technologies, like FinFET primarily came from academia, right? A lot of the patents for FinFET were actually relatively open, right? Now, definitely not the most advanced versions of it, but still, right? While GAAFET is actually extremely fragmented. So we have RibbonFET from Intel, we have their own takes from Samsung and TSMC, which are different, and there's a technology that's supposedly boosting efficiency on GAAFET nodes, which is backplane power delivery. Intel is supposedly the first one to actually implement that with 18A. So, for example, when TSMC will come out with 2 nanometer, it's not going to have backplane power delivery. That was pushed to TSMC A16 node. But those are very details. You don't need to know all of that. Why am I now focusing on 14A? Well, I just talked with you about how 18A has failed to attract third-party buyers. Again, whether it's due to low yields or low performance or low efficiency or just poor supply in general, it doesn't matter, right? It's just what has happened. Well, with 14A, 14A is supposedly live or die by the sort of can we get third-party buyers? And in fact, it's very seemingly seems like if 14A does not get adopted by companies other than Intel, then 14A could be the last node that Intel builds in Intel foundries. And after that, if they fail to do so, they might just sell off their foundries, whether it's to Samsung, which probably would be the likeliest buyer because TSMC buying up Intel would come with huge monopoly conflicts of interest in the industry. There isn't really any large player. Now, China has some emerging semiconductor businesses, but I doubt that the United States government would allow Intel to be sold, like Intel Foundry Tech to be sold to China. But let's actually see what is being said about 14A in detail. New CEO Li Pu Tan said on Thursday the company's engineers were busy working with customers to jumpstart its next-gen contract manufacturing process, or foundry. Now, of course, they still need foundries to actually build this. Those customers for the company's so-called 14A manufacturing process are crucial to the success of the tech, so much so that if it fails to secure a big one, it could shut down its cutting-edge manufacturing business altogether, according to Intel's quarterly filing on Thursday. Riley saying, yes, I do. I can't live without gate-all-around and backside power delivery. That's how I like my chips. Powerful and efficient. Well, it seems like backplane power delivery or backside power delivery, basically interchangeable. Some stuff are marketing, some stuff are more academic in terms of the terms used. It seems like backside power delivery is not as big of a deal. 18A is kind of turning out to be more of a TSMC 3 nanometer rather than 2 nanometer competitor. And when you're looking at its yields, it kind of is a competitor to almost nothing. One wonders if even Samsung might have better production output of their latest nodes. Yeah, but I'm definitely in favor of having more good technology than less. We are developing Intel 14A, this is now a quote from them, from the ground up in close partnership with large external customers. Now, again, whether that means that those customers actually buy into that is a different discussion, right? Because technically they could be doing kind of what Sony did when designing the PS4, right? Mark Cerny went to third-party developers and asked them, what do you need? And they said, look, we need 8 gigs of memory, so at least 6 gigabytes are usable for our games. Look, we need a powerful GPU to handle new technologies like physics-based materials, right? And more advanced shadows and blah, 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 right? It seems like 14A is not just like an internal thing at Intel, but it's actually like being designed to appeal to customers. Now, of course, beyond performance and efficiency and actual output, the other major question is, what will it cost to produce? Will Intel potentially sell it at cost or even at a loss, just so they could still keep the foundries running? Because underutilized foundries can sometimes eat up more cost, especially opportunity cost, than selling it at a loss. At least this way, you kind of establish a relationship with a company. You might be, that company might be inclined to pay you more for the next node they buy from you. Hey, if your yields improved and suddenly your cost of production per die actually drops, so now suddenly maybe you actually can make a profit. Yeah, but we don't know who those customers exactly are, but we are going to get to that. I mean, you can kind of guess it from the thumbnail at least a little bit. By the way, guys, we've been streaming for about an hour. Thank you for watching. Thank you for commenting. If you're watching this, you're enjoying this, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. Don't just comment live, but also comment afterwards. That helps tremendously with the algorithm, helps us attract new people, helps us grow the community. Of course, there are all the ways to support me through this channel: super chat, super stickers, becoming a channel member, becoming a Patreon supporter. So it's all very much appreciated. And right while you're watching, just click the like button. That helps, of course, as well. I hope Intel can make it work somehow. Otherwise, TSMC gonna charge up to 100K per wafer. Yeah, and I mean, like, it's not just Intel, right? Like with Samsung's recent issues, and I mean, we saw the delay of the Exynos 2500 and what that means, and we still see like even the Exynos 2600, even though it looks promising in ways like the GPU, the CPU still kind of betrays, oh, they still cannot quite match the clock speeds that you would associate with TSMC, and it backs the question, what's the actual efficiency if you were to actually get it to a clock speed somewhat competitive with TSMC? So yeah, I fully understand it. There's a lot to worry about here, actually, not just as a nerd who wants the best tech, but also as a consumer who wants their tech to stay relatively reasonable in terms of pricing, right? So Tencent in the memo released with the result that they're working in close partnership with large external customers, and going forward, our investment in Intel 14A will be based on confirmed customer commitments. We will build what our customers need when they need it and earn their trust through consistent execution. This is important because Intel has, even in their GAFET notes, already been a bit of a disappointment. So actually, we were kind of supposed to already have a GAFET note from Intel, and that was Intel 20A. And it was kind of what 18A and 14A are right now. So 20A was supposed to be like, oh, it's our first GAFET node, doesn't have the greatest yield, maybe doesn't even have like backplane power delivery yet, right? Maybe that will only come with 18A. But 18A, believe me, right? 18A is gonna appeal to customers, and it's going to be now finally actually ahead of TSMC, right? Obviously 20A was canceled and kind of merged with what we now get with 18A, right? And 18A is coming out, thankfully, with tech like backside power delivery. But at least from what they said before, they've definitely gone back on the promise of 18A appealing to customers. By everything we see about 18A, it's just an Intel node. Yeah, Riley, I understand you don't want Intel chips inside your iPhones, and I will get to that as well, because there is actually some interesting stuff here to discuss. Because there, Jeff Poo, who has a mixed track record in actually leaking stuff, but when it comes to actual like internal like company ongoings, he is a decent analyst and leaker. But basically, wait, is that a comment? No, yeah, I don't need a comment, right? So according to Pooh, Intel has already started handing out early 14A process design kits. That makes sense. It usually takes about 3 years to get to a new process, and especially combined with like a new architecture as well. So that would be about the time, considering we could get like 18A late this year, early next year. Then we would get like 18AP and other variants on it, right? So let's see what he says. The next focus Intel 14A process will wait, did I skip something? No. They started giving out process design kits, PDKs to partners, and Apple is one of the companies showing interest. The next focus, Intel 14A process will incorporate second-gen ribbon FAT, so GAFET, first gen is 18A, second gen is 14A, and Power Direct, making it a technological evolution upon the foundation of Power VA via whatever its backside power delivery. So all the technologies I've already mentioned introduced in Intel's 18A. Again, some of those technologies were supposed to be in 20A, but then were merged into 18A because Intel just cannot handle with their foundries having too many nodes simultaneously. Targeting both AI and edge application, that means absolutely nothing. Intel is a beggar right now, and as the saying goes, beggars can't be choosers. I was starting to get like a headache from keeping my AirPods into long. Everyone talks about AI and edge applications because that's where the big money is in. Everybody wants to say, oh, we are compatible with AI and edge. But like every node, technically, it's the same thing. It's not quite the same thing, but when you think about cars, right, there are nodes that are specifically for cars. Now, what is interesting about that? Like, I believe TSMC brands them as A nodes, right, like as for auto. For cars, there is a special consideration here, which is the thermals inside, right? Now, obviously, you wouldn't put it next to like the combustion engine or the hottest part of the battery in an EV. But cars might have greatly fluctuating temperatures, not only from obviously the motors that make them run, the batteries that power EVs, but also just because they stand outside, they collect all the heat around them, or in the winter they get outrageously cold. So sure, a car will usually have a pretty advanced, pretty sophisticated cooling solution for its integrating silicon, but that silicon still needs to be tested be very temperature resilient, relatively at least to even a smartphone chip, I would argue. And what happens there is that you kind of make it a special node, but basically it's a little bit more specific testing rather than an actually special node. With AI, honestly, there is nothing special about the nodes for AI. TSMC also has another subvariant of their nodes called X. Those are kind of server or high-end desktop workstation optimized nodes, which are designed to be pretty much the same node, but somewhat efficient enough to be higher clocked, right? That being said, they're basically almost identical to the P nodes in terms of performance. Maybe sometimes it launches before a P node, maybe sometimes right after, but X nodes are not that special. A nodes are barely special when it comes to TSMC. When it comes to Intel just saying, oh, 14A is built for this and that, this is a marketing push, and Jeff Pu is kind of regurgitating shit like that. So there's several customers who are expressing interest in producing test chips. Should be noted, again, showing interest in just seeing the technology and producing a test chip means absolutely nothing, right? They could get disappointed by it. And this is now more interesting, saying we anticipate NVIDIA's gaming GPUs, their low-end versions, because NVIDIA has recently switched from Samsung to TSMC as a provider for their GPUs. So only the low-end version, so maybe the 60 class GPUs and under, maybe even only the 50 class and under in some laptop variants, and Apple's M series to emerge as adopters of Intel 14A. So this is worthless, unfortunately, because this is entirely speculative. This is also something that is very easy to actually manipulate analysts. Like somebody internally at Intel could basically be primed by the upper end guys. You know what? Leak this, right? Leak saying, oh, Apple wants to make M series chips based on that. Now, why do I think there is something still behind this rumor or this report by Jeff Pu specifically? My cat is literally beating me with her tail, so I don't stop. Petting her. Jesus, what a princess! But why do I think this has some legs to stand on? First, Apple has now very varied needs for CPUs, GPUs, SoCs, and that is because Apple is building up private cloud compute. And don't forget the rumor that Apple is supposedly wishing to expand their own server services. Now, there is still a little bit of uncertainty whether they want to make an actual competitor to Microsoft's Azure, to Google Cloud, or to Amazon's AWS services. However, there is very much reason to believe that at least for their own stuff, Apple iCloud, Apple TV, so movie streaming, music streaming for Apple Music, as all their own AI stuff, right? Like private cloud compute, but of course, eventually expanding that too, offering Mac services in the cloud, like Xcode Compute, for example, which they kind of have promised, still haven't yet launched, right? They could also do that for other stuff as well. Like, imagine if you only are using like the lowest end MacBook Air, but you're working with like an 8K project, maybe Apple would allow you to actually let it be compute on a cloud. Or even maybe if you build your own Mac server, right? If Apple goes back into their own server business, they could also launch back the server software stack that they used to have to turn Macs into actual servers. But the other reason is that those compute needs in the cloud are very different from the extreme smallness focus, efficiency focus that they have for A series chips, M series chips, and in fact for M5 and beyond, Apple is rumored to adopt chiplet-based architectures, at least on M Pro and M Max, M Ultra chips. So, for example, Apple already kind of does chiplets on their Ultra processors, right? However, those chiplets are gigantic because they just take two M chips, two M Max chips, their largest monolithic dies they produce, and then they combine them over a silicon interposer, which is pretty outdated chiplet technology at this point. 10,000 connections was pretty great for chip-to-chip interconnects back when Apple launched the M1 Max, back when they launched the M1 Ultra. Now that we are on the M3 Ultra, and supposedly M5 Ultra might not be more than a year away, we definitely also could need more technology, more advanced stuff for those interposers, those silicon interconnectors. And when they're making chiplets, now they actually have way more leverage to say, you know what? We get the highest clock speeds and absolute highest efficiency from TSMC. We can build our CPU chiplet on top of that, right? But in terms of GPU, you know what? We might lose like 5% efficiency by using Intel rather than TSMC, but we don't need higher clock speed because we don't really overclock our GPUs that much, right? And Intel is offering us 25-30% lower prices per die area, right? Per square millimeter. So Apple could conceivably combine TSMC and Intel-based chiplets. But what they also could do is they could actually design more server-oriented chiplets, right? Which means that like they would need a lot of stuff that like controls network cards, network switches, right? Because obviously servers have a ton of internet bandwidth that needs to be pushed out. They could conceivably start to want to really disconnect CPU, GPU, neural engine. So maybe they could just say, oh, you know what? Our A&E architecture is great. Our neural engines are not clocked too high. So it doesn't really matter to us even like what's the best efficient stuff, like right on the server. We have the cooling for it. We have the energy consumption necessary. It's more efficient just because it's efficient on an architectural level. But hey, we're giving up 5% efficiency, 8% performance, but we're getting 40% lower prices from Intel than from TSMC. So let's make our neural engine chiplets on Intel, but everything else could still be like TSMC. So Apple has a lot of variants that they could go with. Just saying, oh, it's going to be Apple M series, in my opinion, is very short-sighted, especially since we have these predictions of the inevitable evolution of Apple's M series chips, right? The chiplet approach, the new silicon interposers, just the evolution of TSMC 2 nanometer at that point competing. At that point, it would even be TSMC A16 competing with Intel 14A. So there's a lot to consider. Riley saying, I work with 1080x80 resolution and Facebook still compresses that, and bro is talking about 8K. Not just 8K, but if you're leveraging like a giant server, right? I mean, it would already be complicated whether you're editing it live or not, right? But you could even use like multi-stream 8K. You could have like several files of 8K, and even like with something like the Final Cut Pro iPhone app, right? If the iPhone actually gets 8K, you could have like several iPhones record like live multiple streams of 8K in ProRes RAW even, and live stream it to your Mac. Now I would be seriously asking what would be the live compute capabilities to actually make that work over cloud, but I'm just presenting you, there are plenty of options. Obviously, with something like code, where you could just write your code and then leave it to the cloud to compile it, that's a somewhat different, of course, proposition. And plus the integration with private cloud compute will also allow the integration for Apple's own AI services. Think about a more advanced version of Apple's cleanup feature, right? Something that wouldn't be limited to 8 or 12 gigabytes of memory, but could work with like a super large LLM that might need like a 512 gigabyte chip. It's so instant that you wouldn't need like a billion chips in the cloud, right? Because one chip handles a task, then the other, right? But just so you could hold that LLM in memory, now you would need like server class infrastructure, or or an M5 Ultra Mac, or at some point, or something like that. But even that wouldn't be able to give you like, well, maybe over Thunderbolt 5 combining, but you could even conceivably combine, well, not just conceivably, that's obviously what happens in cloud, but you could combine it to have like multi-terabyte levels of memory, a terabit level of bandwidth and stuff like that. So obviously a lot of improvements, that just because of how large it is, how much energy it can consume, how much cooling you have in the cloud. Problem is, anything you put on the internet, unless you're paying companies, are cheapening out with server size. Oh, absolutely. I would believe that, like for example, with Xcode, right? I believe that it's free, like to a certain level. I mean, it's similar to how, like, as an app store developer, you get like some iCloud storage that can be leveraged by your app, right? I mean, it's kind of included in the $100 development fee that you pay to Apple annually. But if you want more, because your app has grown, it has more consumers, well, now you pay Apple per gigabyte, or at that point per terabyte of extra storage, per life users, right? Because it's not just the amount of storage that you need, it's also the amount of bandwidth if you actually have a lot of concurrent users accessing it. And again, this is where Apple's own usage of M-series chips in servers, which we have discussed in the past, comes into play. And in order to keep that cost low, now Apple has some advantages. For example, like their M-series chips are in-house, right? So they can control it. And for example, if they overproduce chips because maybe one Mac didn't sell as well as they thought, well, just put it into servers, right? So there is like a logistical advantage here. But energy efficiency, logistical advantage, but also Apple's pricing leverage. Now, there is some ways that they could leverage price. They could walk to TSMC and say, look, TSMC, we're gonna double our M-series orders, right? And TSMC would be, oh my God, so much money. Thank you, Apple. But Apple is like, but we don't want to pay the exact same cost per die, right? We want that to be at least 20% lower. That way our production cost is not double, but 80% higher, right? Or 60% higher, right? And TSMC would be like, well, I mean, we can offer you like 5% lower, but what will you do, right? Who else would you buy this from? Our tech is great. Look at our new node that's coming out soon. You don't want to lose your early access that you have gotten so accustomed to. And Apple could say, sure, maybe we cannot get something quite as good, especially not in the numbers we need. But hey, thanks to our new chiplet architecture, we can actually leverage other companies to make M-series chips or server class chips. And hey, Intel is offering us 30% lower pricing per die, or like per same size die. Maybe you can produce more dies, which is necessary. Maybe you make the dies more efficient and more powerful. We acknowledge that, TSMC, so we are happy to pay you more money than Intel, but not 30% more money. Or if you think about it, like a 33% reduction in price from TSMC to Intel, right? Let's say TSMC charges you $50,000 per wafer at that point, right? And Intel might be 5% worse in every way, but they only charge you 33,000, right? Now, what kind of difference in performance and efficiency, especially in servers where you don't are working with like passively cooled Macs and iPhones that need vapor chambers and everything, like that doesn't matter. The price advantage is so huge. You're gonna bite that bullet and accept some downsides with working with Intel. Well, now that you have done that, you go to back to TSMC and say, look, this is what Intel is offering us. And TSMC is like, well, we cannot offer you that, but hey, how about we charge you 40,000, right? And suddenly Intel is happy that they have a customer at all, especially a large one. TSMC is happy that they didn't lose Apple entirely, at least not for the server market. And Apple is happy that their average production cost has actually gone, if you think about the 50-50 split, now we're looking at 36,000, between 40,000 for TSMC and 33 for Intel. Now, this is kind of best case scenario. I don't assume that the gaps are going to be this large. But Apple has dropped their production costs by 20, 25, 30%, right? So in the end, it's not a win-win-win, because TSMC definitely lost in that equation, because ideally they would make everything they can for Apple at the highest possible price, but at least they didn't lose Apple, which would be a big deal. Apple is their largest customer. And sure, NVIDIA will be happy to buy up a lot of capacity, and AMD is now also being a little bit more ambitious in how early they adopt the nodes, while previously Apple might have had like a year to 18-month gap between them adopting a node and then AMD and other companies. Now it might shrink to as low as 6 months, and versus a company like Qualcomm, it might literally be 3 months or something like that, right? So it's not like Apple still has the exact same leverage over TSMC as they used to have in the past. With Intel back in the game and potentially a supplier to Apple, this could be changing. TSMC gonna be like 69K per wafer, and that's final. And I want you to tell us how nice it is. I think Apple making a deal makes sense though. Apple likes premium stuff. They don't want to be a lot of nodes behind, even on display chips. Yeah, actually on display controllers, Apple is notorious for adopting nodes that nobody else even cares about. Like, I wonder what like Samsung is even doing with their displays, because Apple has had 10-bit OLED on the same fabrication process for OLED that Samsung is using, right? Obviously, Apple has even gone beyond the production process. Like the iPhone 16 Pro has an even more efficient panel than Samsung has had in the past, than Samsung even has like 6 months after the iPhone 16 Pro. But like, I don't know if Samsung just has crappy display controllers that they cannot give you more brightness, or they cannot give you 10-bit, or they're really using ancient technology completely, and it's not just very clear to us as consumers. But yeah, like, there is a lot that is happening with chips that a lot of people just don't fully understand, right? Like, because we forget that chips aren't just SoCs, aren't just CPUs, aren't just GPUs, aren't just neural engines. It's so much more. It's display controllers, it's Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modems, it's 5G modems, and that's also where a partnership with Intel could come. Could bear benefits, right? Apple doesn't have to port necessarily M-series chip. They could port a C-series chip, which is their 5G modems, right? Or at some point, I don't know what they're gonna call their Wi-Fi and Bluetooth chips, W chip, even though they have had W chips in the past, B chip, whatever, right? That could be based on Intel. Intel has actually in the past produced really good Wi-Fi modems, so in that regard, maybe their nodes are actually pretty good. Now, 14A is probably going to be a bit too expensive and too little benefit for a 5G or Wi-Fi modem for a while. But who knows? If Intel is really aggressive on pricing, they could do that. But yeah, Apple definitely, they have actual A-series chips, they have M-series chips, they have server variants of those chips to leverage, they have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi chips, they have display controllers, even the motherboard, but a motherboard will never be built on 14 angstrom. So just saying, Apple has a lot of leverage here without potentially, as Riley said, like bogging down the iPhone with an Intel chip. And then people are worried, oh my God, am I going to get the Intel-based iPhone or the TSMC-based iPhone that is better, right? Like, we had that split in the past when Apple made, I believe it was the A9 processor, right, simultaneously on TSMC's nodes and Samsung nodes, right? Let me actually, Apple A9 wiki. I want this in English. So it's it's shared between TSMC and Samsung, and it's built on either a Samsung 14 LPE, so that's low power efficiency focus, and TSMC 16 nanometer. I think this is just FinFET. Yeah, so we have had that kind of like dual sourcing for chips in the past, and this was where Apple kind of saw that even regular consumers, or at least like more engaged, like slightly more nerdy consumers said, oh, the TSMC version, even though 16 nanometer kind of sounded worse than 14 nanometer, because that's what happened with the non-enthusiast crowd when the news initially came out, right? People said, oh my God, we have 14 and 16 nanometer. Well, 14 nanometer must be better, right? But then people quickly saw, oh, TSMC 16 nanometer is way better, or at least noticeably better, which you kind of don't expect to happen in a controlled environment like a smartphone, is better than Samsung 14 nanometer. So people were starting to kind of actively seek out 16 nanometer variants. Like what they love is Apple is that haptic feedback and speakers and biometrics, etc., are all top quality. We're a Chinese company would cheap out on those. Yeah, and I mean we have talked about that in the past. Those are quality of life things, right? And I would also argue microphones, for example. Like I know a lot of people like some of the over-processed, like very noise reduction-y level that you get, but like Apple even puts like literally more microphones, literally adds to the cost of the device. Like most high-end devices max out at like 3 microphones in their device. Apple has 4, right? And Apple has all the processing, all the compute to actually like combine all of that. That's why they have these exclusive like audio settings inside for like video recording, and even now it works with things like AirPods coming with iOS 26. And yeah, like when you look at it, for example, like I actually haven't read this review for the Z Flip 7. Let me look at the speakers here. Speaker test. The speaker setup of the Galaxy Z Flip 7 wouldn't surprise anyone who's seen a Samsung phone in recent years. One speaker on the top and another one on the bottom and one up top that doubles as an earpiece, which kind of robs you of stereo speaker functionality, unfortunately, if you close this. I mean, technically that speaker kind of is here, but in portrait orientation, the top speaker is assigned the left channel, while in landscape, channels are assigned dynamically to correspond to a handset's orientation. This is also important because on some Chinese brands, that's actually not the case. They don't dynamically respond. One is always the left, one is always the right. The Z Flip 7 earned a good rating for loudness in our test. Again, it's not 26.1 is not great, right? But then you think about the Fold 7, to which review we actually reacted to recently, and you will find that that one, because of how thin it is and because of the complication of the large hinge, the 3 cameras, right, it actually ends up with a worse speaker system. Despite what you think, like, right, this is like a device you unfold. This is a device that literally could deliver you a better soundstage than any other smartphone. It could be like basically like the most premium version of an iPad mini that you could imagine. And no, it has terrible LUFFs are better the lower the number, right? So 26 on the Z Flip 7 versus here the Fold 7, and then of course if you include the this does not actually tell you about the actual sound stage feeling, right? So some things can be a little louder or a little bit more quiet while still being noticeably very close in performance, or actually wildly different, right? Yeah, but Apple absolutely, right? And this is the 15 Pro Max. Let me actually look at the 16 Pro Max. Is it actually in their testing like actually louder? Yeah, barely. But like I've seen like actual like side-by-side comparison. The 16 Pro Max does give you noticeably more loudness than that. And again, LUFFs, it's not the greatest metric here. They do have frequency response here. Again, frequency response is not always best when it's like perfect on the graph, but like you can have a more opinionated system in that regard. Like Beats by Dre has always been notorious for like really amping up the bass in this regard to some of the mids and highs. But a lot of people who listen disproportionately to hip hop and stuff like that did prefer at least that default thing. Also, you can of course tune that frequency response at least somewhat, on headphones. Yeah, so I do fully understand what you mean, Riley. There are quality of life things that really do get lost in the mix. Even, by the way, when companies talk about cooling systems, right? Like, I feel like Xiaomi is always upfront saying, oh my God, we have the latest version of our vapor chamber 2000X 0.75, and it's 78% larger and while being 12% thinner. And then you actually test out the cooling on the device, and it's kind of the same as it was before, maybe a little bit better. Mostly benefits from the chip actually being more efficient. Makes you actually wonder if the chip was actually like noticeably higher power consumption. Would this cooling system maybe even be in some ways worse than before? We have Rosa saying well done and thank you, so I assume she's probably going to bed. Thank you so much for joining and watching and listening, of course. Yeah, I am slowly wrapping this up. Some quick-fire news. Actually, a big public service announcement. Obviously, the public beta launched alongside developer beta 4. It should also be noted that on iOS, you do get a revised version of the developer beta. So if you install the first version of developer beta 4, you either can have public beta now, which is on the latest revision, or you get beta 4 kind of version 2, though Apple doesn't really advertise it as such. So feel free to install it. It's actually been pretty stable and pretty great for me, though I still maintain that most people should probably run release versions. I don't have any big issues left. My banking apps work. All my stuff works. Performance is good. Battery life is very predictable and stable. This is not to dissuade you from installing, but it still doesn't have my full thumbs up. I mean, we're still like 2 months away from the actual release. Maybe by public beta 2, I will be able to fully recommend it to more and more people. And the other small piece of news, which is actually really great, which is that the Blender guys are working on an Apple, I wanted to say an Apple Pencil version, but they're working on an iPad version with Apple Pencil support. So they're saying this requires adapting to platform-specific paradigms, but also to offer more task-oriented user interfaces with reduced information density. Guys, they understood the assignment of making an iPad app. I really hope it means that it still has the full features, but it just has reduced information density. This will be achieved by extending existing input methods and improving workspaces and application templates, running on top of a regular Blender build. This is very important. Now, whether or not this means that the iPad would be getting all the beta versions and shit like that, I doubt that. I think it would just run on the stable releases of Blender, which is probably for the best, let's be honest. But also Blender has been recently reworked to actually focus on Vulkan, right? So from a previous OpenGL stack, it was now rewritten in Vulkan, and that has actually resulted from for its launch times to go from like 40 seconds to like 3-4 seconds. In fact, on my Mac, it basically launches instantaneously. So I think that maybe that was also partially why they said, you know what, now we actually have the efficiency to make it for iPad. That's not, of course, to forget that it's, of course, has seen metal optimizations for Mac. It runs well even on 8 GB Macs. Now, I do think there will be a cutoff in which iPads support it, but even if it goes back to like M1, that's still great. The first version will reportedly focus on sculpting and basic object manipulation, version, with hope of bringing tools like the grease pencil and storyboarding to the iPad later. So this does seem like a multi-stage project. They will not give you all Blender functionality right away. I always dislike that because you already have all the code necessary because you do have a Mac app. You basically just have to like condense a few menus to make them less confusing on an iPad. But even then, you can connect iPads to external monitors. But hey, as long as they really focus on Apple Pencil functionality, that's great. That's gonna be a very not unique advantage. Obviously, you get like stylus support on Windows devices, and you can even connect the Mac to like a Wacom tablet. And to use then an app like Blender with a stylus, but it's just the most convenient with an iPad, in my opinion. Riley saying my IAP stuff got fixed with beta 4. I don't know what IAP is, Riley. Maybe it's just app and it's just a miswriting, or maybe my brain is malfunctioning. Yeah, but maybe it's some kind of banking stuff. Who knows? The team's current mockups show a single window workflow that prioritizes screen real estate and quick access to tools via floating UI elements and contextual overlays. Menus are collapsed by default, and the usual tool settings header has been replaced with floating panels tailored to pen input. So it's notable they still have like a lot of small clickable interfaces. So while it will be touch optimized, it seems like they're kind of looking to replace your cursor with your Apple Pencil. But of course, now that the cursor has been redesigned with iPadOS 26 to actually be pointy rather than just a flying dot on your screen, it also will probably just benefit from iPadOS 26. The audience is Blender users, the developers optimize. There's no distinction between desktop or tablet users, the same way mouse/keyboard and graphic tablet user interfaces are treated equally. So that's great. So even if they don't launch it with full feature set right away, they do seem to at least have that in the backs of their mind, that that's an important level to reach. That's fantastic. I really hope that with Blender coming to iPad, hell, maybe hopefully it also comes to the Mac App Store through that, which I know obviously you aren't forced to use the Mac App Store like you're forced to use the iOS/iPadOS App Store, but I still prefer using a dedicated storefront, a first-party storefront especially, versus site loading, versus third-party storefronts. I know I'm very simple that way. Not that I'm obviously not capable of using that. I mean, multiple apps that I'm using even now have been site loaded and stuff like that, like OBS is site loaded, Better Display is site loaded. So yeah, it's not like I cannot use that, but whenever I can get my apps through the App Store, I prefer doing it that way. But yeah, but that's about it for today, guys. Let me quickly check if there's any last minute news and leaks and rumors that we might have missed. Nothing on Mac rumors. Nothing on 9to5 Mac. They're just regurgitating the Mac rumor that we've talked in the beginning. So we've been streaming now for almost 2 hours. I didn't expect it to be such a long stream, but I had a lot of fun, and I am more high energy now after sleeping for 3 hours, napping for 3 hours today, and sleeping like 7 hours in the night, 6 hours at least. So I am kind of rested. I had a lot of meeting with friends and family members. I went to the gym a lot. I'm kind of actually almost tired out. Today I was taking care of a cat for for a family we know, and I walked through half the town. So I'm really glad that you guys still find time to join me, even in my very irregular schedule, even with my very unpredictable levels of energy. To anyone who is watching, if you are watching this and you are enjoying this, please leave a like, please subscribe, please leave a comment. Don't just comment live. Please also leave a regular comment afterwards. That helps tremendously with the algorithm. And of course, share the video with anybody else who you think might enjoy it. You can support me directly whenever you catch me live via super chats and super stickers. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Steve, Jonathan, and Max. And you can become a supporter over on Patreon, like Benveni, all MarkTech Pro Max level supporters. Thank you to all of that continued support. Discord. It means so much to me, but also it's just great when you guys join, when we have little debates, when I get your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements, and of course, join the Discord. That really helps a lot. We have a small but growing community over there, highly engaged. We are critical or supportive of other YouTubers. We react to the latest news and rumors even quicker than I do with my live streams. So I hope you will enjoy it there as well. Thank you guys. This was extremely fun. I hope to be back by Thursday, if not by Friday. I will of course let you know. And let me know what else you would like to see me react to, what else you would like to see me analyze. And I'll see you then. This is Mark Tech tuning out.